Charles Lucky Luciano was born Salvatore Lucania on November 24, 1897 in Lucky, Sicily. He was the middle child of Antonio and Rosalie Lucania with two older brothers and two younger sisters. In 1906, at the age of 8, Luciano and his family moved from Sicily to Manhattan's Lower East Side in New York City. By the age of 14, he sold hats after dropping out of school. However, after winning $244 in a dice game, he decided to earn money in the streets rather than work a normal job. Early on, Luciano had his own street gang. One of his rackets was a protection racket for the Jewish and Irish teenagers. One of the Jewish teenagers was a kid named Myolansky who refused to pay. This resulted in the gang beating him up. After a while, he still didn't pay the gang and earned their respect. Luciano and Lansky would become lifelong criminal associates and friends. While still a teenager in the early to mid-1910s, he joined the 5 Points gang. This was a predominantly Italian street gang led by Paolo Vaccarelli. Other members of this gang would also go on to become legendary mobsters such as Al Capone, Johnny Torrio, and Frankie Yale. By 1916, Luciano had been selling morphine. The sale and possession of morphine had been regulated by the federal government the year prior. Upon being caught, he was sentenced to 6 months in prison. After he was released, he reunited with Myolansky as well as his other associate, Frank Costello. On January 17, 1920, the 18th Amendment passed outlawing alcohol in the United States. This proved to be very lucrative for anyone involved in importing or selling illegal alcohol. By 1920, Luciano was working under Joe the Boss Masseria. Joe the Boss was a high-ranking member of the Morello crime family led by Salvatore D'Aquila. At this time, the Morello crime family was still one organization, although its power had diminished in recent years. On December 10th, D'Aquila was gunned down on orders from Giuseppe Morello, the original boss of the family who was nearing his parole date for a counterfeiting conviction he received in 1910. Immediately after the assassination of D'Aquila, the Morello family split into two organizations. One was headed by Vincenzo Terranova, Morello's half-brother. The other was headed by Gaetano Tommy Reina. The murder of D'Aquila resulted in boss of bosses Salvatore D'Aquila ordering Giuseppe Morello and D'Aquila's former boss Ignacio Lupo, who was an ally of Morello, to be assassinated. Another man who was condemned by D'Aquila was his former hitman Umberto Vallee. Vallee, however, was able to get back on side with D'Aquila on the condition he assassinates Vincenzo Terranova and Joe Masseria, who is a potential threat to D'Aquila's power. He successfully assassinated Vincenzo Terranova on May 7, 1922 in a drive-by shooting on 116th Street in Manhattan. As a result of Vincenzo Terranova's death, Joe Masseria is appointed the new boss of Terranova's family. His underboss would be Giuseppe Morello, who was able to get the death sentence of himself and Lupo relinquished by contacting a mutual associate in Sicily. Joe Masseria, however, was still being hunted by Umberto Vallee, with 2 attempts being made in his life. The first attempt was made the day after Vincenzo Terranova was assassinated on May 8th, and the second attempt was made on August 9th. On August 11th, Vallee was willing to attend a sit-down in a cafe with Masseria and Morello to try straightening everything out. The true reason for them reaching out to Vallee was so they could have him set up to be killed. Vallee realized this and ran out the cafe, but was too late. 2 gunmen gunned him down in broad daylight. It is often theorized that the gunmen were Charlie Luciano and Vito Genovese. After the murder of Umberto Vallee, Joe Masseria became increasingly powerful, with Luciano being appointed to the position of top lieutenant in his organization. Throughout the 1920s, Luciano also worked under the Jewish mafia boss and gambler Arnold Rothstein. This had him working alongside his longtime associates Mayor Lansky and Frank Costello. Others working under Arnold Rothstein were Louis Lepke Buchalter, Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, and Dutch Schultz. Rothstein taught Luciano how to bribe politicians and run crime like a business. The 1920s were great for Luciano as he got involved in gambling, importing and selling alcohol and narcotics. In 1928, Joe Masseria was seeing a great increase in power. He had major influence over all the other families in New York. The problem was that the boss of bosses, Salvatore D'Aquila, was still in power. Masseria had him killed. The killers, Manfredi Alminio and Steve Ferrigno, were Masseria loyalists, with Mineo being D'Aquila's second-in-command. On October 10th, D'Aquila was gunned down next to his car while he was on his way to a doctor's appointment. This allowed Masseria to take the position of boss of all bosses. As well as this, he has a loyalist running the former D'Aquila family, and he could exert his power over the Reina family, the Profaci family, and the Shiro family. During his reign as boss of all bosses, he became greedy and tried to take a piece of Tommy Reina's ice distribution business. During the 20s, refrigerators were expensive, so most households didn't have them. Most households relied on a delivery of large blocks of ice to keep in ice boxes as a means of refrigeration. This meant that the ice distribution business was very lucrative and generated a lot of revenue for the Reina family, on top of businesses like illegal alcohol and narcotics. Masseria also demanded that the boss of the Castellammerese family, Nicola Shiro, pay him $10,000 out of nowhere as tribute. This caused Shiro to step down as the boss of the family and return to Sicily. The man who took his place as boss was Salvatore Maranzano. Salvatore Maranzano was a member of the Sicilian mafia before emigrating to the US in the mid-1920s. As a native of Castellammerese del Golfo, he was inducted to the family led by Niccolo Shiro. Maranzano was a very intelligent and elusive figure. Even today, there are no confirmed pictures of him. During the latter 20s, Salvatore Maranzano was an importer of alcohol and ran his own real estate business. One member of Niccolo Shiro's family named Giuseppe Bonanno became a protege of Maranzano and greatly admired him. In 1930, once Niccolo Shiro stepped down, Salvatore Maranzano was elected the new boss of the family. Salvatore Maranzano became interested in taking over the position of boss of all bosses from Joe Masseria. By February 1930, Tommy Reina had switched his allegiance to Maranzano. This resulted in Joe Masseria ordering his death and tasking Charlie Luciano to have it carried out. On February 26, 1930, Tommy Reina was caught outside his girlfriend's house by Vito Genovese and Masseria loyalist Joseph Pinzolo. Vito Genovese shot him with a shotgun, causing him later to die in hospital. Joseph Pinzolo would be appointed head of the Reina family, much to the dismay of Reina's underboss and longtime business partner Tommaso Tommy Gagliano. This event marked the beginning of the war between Masseria and Maranzano. From February to August, there were many murders between the two factions. On August 15, 1930, however, Maranzano would deal a crippling blow to the Masseria organization. On this day, Giuseppe Morello was caught going into his East Harlem office by Maranzano's hitmen Joe Vallee and Sebastiano Buster from Chicago, Domingo. Vallee acted as the getaway driver while Domingo shot and killed Morello. Giuseppe Morello was considered by Maranzano as the brains and strategy behind Masseria, and his death would give Maranzano a significant advantage. After biding their time, Reina family members Tommy Gagliano and Tommy Lucchese began plotting to kill Joseph Pinzolo. They got their opportunity to carry it out on September 5th when Pinzolo was at an office leased by Tommy Lucchese. Girolamo Santucci was sent to do it. Another blow to the Masseria organization was the November 5th murder of D'Aquila family boss Almineo and his underboss Steve Ferrigno. Charlie Luciano was set to attend a meeting at Steve Ferrigno's apartment on Pelham Parkway in the Bronx. Others set to attend this meeting were Almineo, Joe Masseria, and possibly Vito Genovese. What they didn't know is that their every move was being watched. Joe Vallee had rented an apartment in the same building at the behest of Maranzano. He had ordered them to kill everyone there. Others present in this apartment were Girolamo Santucci and Buster from Chicago. They didn't see Luciano or Masseria, but they did eventually see Mineo and Ferrigno outside Ferrigno's apartment. This led to Maranzano's hitmen ambushing and killing them. Upon the murder of Mineo and Ferrigno, Frank Scialese, a Maranzano loyalist, was installed as boss of the former D'Aquila family. By this point, Maranzano had taken control of the D'Aquila, Reina, and Profaci family. By 1931, Charlie Luciano had become more disillusioned with Masseria. He understood that Joe Masseria's need for complete control had turned the other families against him over time. This culminated in him reaching out to Maranzano, hoping to end the conflict. Luciano was ready to have Masseria killed, and on April 15, 1931, he had him assassinated at a restaurant on Coney Island in Brooklyn. This ultimately put an end to the war and resulted in Maranzano becoming the new boss of all bosses. Luciano was appointed the new boss of the former Masseria family by Maranzano. Luciano communicated with Maranzano through a mutual associate named Vincenzo Troia that the murder of Joe Masseria was for personal reasons and not solely for Maranzano. Luciano realized that replacing the boss of all bosses would not change anything, and Maranzano would have to be killed eventually in order for things to run smoothly. He needed the support of the other families in order to carry out the murder of Maranzano. Luciano had close connections with the Reina family underboss Tommy Lucchese, as well as the current underboss of the D'Aquila family Vincenzo Mangano. Maranzano also grew to dislike Luciano, mainly due to his close relationships with Jewish mobsters and other non-Italian gangsters. This culminated in Maranzano ordering the deaths of Luciano, Frank Costello and Vito Genovese. Luciano was tipped off about this by his friend Tommy Lucchese, who informed him that Maranzano had paid Irish gangster Vincent Mad Dog Cole to carry it out. Luciano struck first, and on September 10, 1931, Luciano enlisted several Jewish hitmen who worked under Majolansky to murder Maranzano. They stabbed him multiple times before shooting him to death. From this point, Luciano could have easily taken the position of boss of all bosses, but instead he chose to have a ruling panel of 5 bosses in New York. He appointed Joe Bonanno to run the former Maranzano family. He replaced the D'Aquila family boss Frank Scalise with Vincent Mangano and appointed his friend Albert Anastasia as the underboss. For his family, he appointed Frank Costello as consigliere and Vito Genovese as his underboss.